Greetings and salutations, and thanks for clicking on the video. Today we're going to be talking about this, which may be the perfect turntable. Now I know, guys, there's no such thing as a perfect turntable, but from a purely conceptual point of view, this one comes very close, and you'll see what I'm talking about as we work our way through the video. This is a Sony PSLX55 II. Now, the date of manufacture, I'm not really sure. I'm assuming that this was manufactured sometime in the 1980s and probably leaning toward the mid-80s here on this one. And Sony was considered a pretty high-end brand at that point in time. This is not the first linear tracking turntable that I've owned. Those of you who have been watching for a long, long time will know that the first turntable that I got when I got back into vinyl in late 2009, early 2010, was a Lab 2100 by Realistic Radio Shack, or Tandy if you're in other parts of the world. Now, that was a pretty good machine, and I've later found out that that particular model was actually made by Onkyo. But this is a head and shoulders much better linear tracking turntable, built a little bit later when they had a little bit more experience with the idea. So, how did I come across this machine? Well, it was on eBay. I was surfing eBay looking for turntables, as I have wont to do on occasion. And I came across this, and I looked at it, and I thought, boy, that is nice. I'd like to have that. But gee, it's expensive, and I can't afford that right now, and turned off the computer and went to bed. I dreamed about this turntable all night long, woke up the next morning and just absolutely couldn't stand it. I had to have it, so I bought it. And I paid more for it than I am willing to admit. However, it is a refurbished turntable, and it's bought from a very trustworthy seller who refurbishes vintage gear. I know it's been cleaned inside and out. The electronic components have all been checked and replaced if necessary. And also, there is a new belt on the tone arm. There is a belt in this machine, not driving the turntable itself, but running the tone arm. And I know that he put a new one on there. He was also kind enough to send me a copy of the manual, which turned out to be very useful in trying to figure out how to work with the logic of the little robot brain that makes this machine work. So let's switch the camera to macro, zoom in, and take a look at the functions and controls here. Moving from right to left, we have the start-stop button. These are your transport controls for the tone arm, right or left. This is your lifter right here. This is a repeat function that you can switch in and out. And here is your speed selector. The speed is selected manually. Over here is the power button. We're going to use that. This light, by the way, is the quartz lock light, which lets you know that the direct drive quartz lock system is working properly. This turntable uses something that Sony came up with called a BSL motor, which is basically brushless and slotless. It's a direct drive system, and it seems to function very, very well. The specifications basically say that the wow and flutter on this turntable is 0.03 and 0.035 den. The rumble, or the signal to noise ratio, is 75 dB. And it is a very, very quiet operating turntable. One of the complaints for a linear tracking turntable is the fact that this tone arm mechanism right here is motorized to move across the record, and on some models the sound of the motor can get to the cartridge and you can actually hear it. On this machine you can't. Not while the record is playing normally, but when it gets to the run-out groove and it goes to the run-out before it lifts and it goes into high gear because of the high velocity of the groove moving over this way, you can hear it because it has to go into like a full speed mode. The advantage of a linear tracking turntable, and one of the reasons that this makes this quote-unquote the perfect turntable, is that you have no tracking error going across. Records are cut that way on a lathe. The cutting stylus goes straight across the record, and there is a transport system that moves it at the proper pitch. Pitch being how close together the grooves are and how quickly the spiral moves from the outer edge to the inner edge. The normal pivoting tone arm has several things about it that contribute to distortion. And of course, a pivoting tone arm, no matter how well it's designed, is going to go across the surface of the record in an arc, which means that there will be anywhere from 2 to 4 degrees of error as far as aligning the stylus to the groove is concerned, and that does cause distortion. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we work our way through the review here. We have the tone arm. Sony did some very interesting things. By the way, the effective length of this tone arm is about 3 inches. So, and it's extremely low mass. I have no idea where the resonance is on this tone arm, but it's got to be extremely low. I'm thinking that it's down in the 3 to 4 hertz range with a tone arm of this low mass. It floats on bearings in this assembly. The tone arm itself is mounted in this moving box right here, and so if you go to touch it, it's very free moving. It's got plenty of travel. It's got good bearings that move it up and down. This is as far up as it goes, though. So if you want to replace styli or something like that, you have to take the cart off to do that. Well, that's not really that big of a deal, since Audio-Technica has made it very easy to swap out carts. And they have a thumb screw here instead of like on the Technics models where they have the little jeweler size head that you absolutely have to get a screwdriver. You don't need a screwdriver for this. This is a thumb screw. You can do it by hand. Right here is the tracking force adjustment lever. If it's in the middle, assuming that you have a 6-gram P-mount cart, then the tracking force will be 1.25 grams. If it's all the way forward, it'll be 1.5, and if it's all the way back, it's 1 gram. I was not able to get my tracking force gauge under this stylus because the tone arm is so low down to the record. There's very little tolerance, and so I wasn't able to get an accurate reading on what it was actually doing. So I'm having to trust Sony that they aligned it properly, but just from an audio point of view, I know it's working correctly. This is a 3482P Audio-Technica cartridge on here, and that has a 0.7 mil spherical stylus on a carbon fiber cantilever, and it seems to work really well at 1.5 grams. I have it set to 1.5 grams, and the audio is impeccable coming out of the machine, so I know it works. When I got the turntable, it came with what I'm assuming would be the original cartridge, although these were not shipped with cartridges. Some models weren't, some were. This is an Audio-Technica ATU12E2, and this is a 1980s vintage cartridge here. Not much information available about it on the web. Replacement styli are available, but exactly the dimensions of the diamond and all that sort of stuff I don't know. Not knowing how many hours are on this cart, I went ahead and took it off, although I did give it a quick listen. And it's not a bad sounding cartridge, but this is an ATU12E2. I was double checking the number there. That's why I got quiet. I wanted to make sure I gave you the right one. The really cool thing about having this ability to swap cartridges quickly is the fact that I'm really going to enjoy this. Here is an Ortofon OMP10. That's a Pickering TE. Here is a Shure M92E. And I also have my Audio-Technica AT92 ECD. And I had a good time last night shaking this turntable down, just replacing carts, listening to all my P-mount carts. I settled on the 3482P simply because I just love the sound of that cart. It's got a very nice, mellow sound. So let me switch this back to macro. There we go. Anyway, here's the tone arm, and it's a T4P tone arm, says it up here. You have a lamp here, which is not just to be pretty and light up the record. And then you have a 45 adapter that goes over here. This is not the one that came with it. This is mine, and it's made out of metal, and it's rather heavy, and I like it. The one that Sony supplied with the turntable was kind of cheesy, actually, for as expensive as this machine was, and didn't fit 45s very well, so I changed that. So let's go ahead and shut up for a little while and actually run the machine and let you see it in operation. And then I'll take the platter off and we'll talk about some of the eccentricities that this machine has. Really quite simple. Put your record on, hit the start button, and here it goes. Those of you who have watched my videos for a while will recognize this record. It's called The Golden Days of Radio, and it's narrated by Jack Benny. It's got a lot of audio clips from classic radio.
Do your youngsters ever ask you, what did you do before television was invented? Now, sometimes it's hard to answer that question in a way that they'll understand.
So that gives you an idea, and of course the stylus tracks across, goes to the run-out groove, picks up, stops, unless you have the repeat function on, and then it doesn't. Now there's one thing that Sony came up with this idea for this particular turntable for how it would determine the size of the record that's on it. And I'm not really thrilled about this, but it's one of those situations, okay? I'd rather have it this way than the kind that has the little things that come up through the turntable to detect it, like the Technics machines. You have a lamp back here, and you have two slots right here, and there are three of them, three sets of two here, and there are photo detectors down here under the platter. There's holes in the platter that allow the photo detectors to work. So let's go ahead and take the platter off, and we can show you the photo detectors. And there they are. By the way, this is the direct drive motor this machine has. It's called a Sony BSL motor, and which means brushless and single pole, or poleless or slotless or something like that. BSL, you can look it up. When you put the rubber mat on, you have to get these little slots here aligned properly with those round holes in the platter, and that determines the position of the rubber mat so it won't slide and you won't cover up these slots, because if you cover up these slots, it's always going to think there's an LP on the turntable, which there isn't, and it will drop the stylus. Now, Sony anticipated this by putting a very nice, shiny, smooth outer edge on the platter here, which is actually below the surface of the deck. So if that does happen, that's where the stylus drops. It drops right in the middle of that, and won't get a whole lot of damage done to it. So, see, I have that on there incorrect. I cannot demonstrate what I want to demonstrate if it's not on properly. So let's slide this over until we get it right. It only goes one way, which is another interesting thing about it. You have to get those things lined up just right. And this time it's right. Okay, yes, I can see down in there, so it's working. So let me show you some of the eccentricities here of this photo sensing system for record size. Let's put a regular 45 on. Okay, so here we go. And I'm going to go ahead and hit the start button. And the tone arm makes its way over. Takes a little while. That's another little frustration. And the record starts to play and everybody's just happy, right? This is the way this is supposed to work. And I didn't change the speed, and I'm not letting you hear the music on that anyway. I don't want the YouTube copyright robots to get me. So on that record, that worked fine. However, I have another 45 here, and it looks like the other, exactly the same as the one that I just played, right? Watch this. It says, nope, there's no record on the turntable. Okay, so in this situation where you have a record that the turntable does not know what size it is or thinks there's no record there, if you put a 10-inch record on here, it thinks it's a 12-inch record, so that won't work. So you have to do the same operation that I'm about to show you here. This record, it thinks it's transparent. I have a couple of LPs that were pressed in the 80s that are on vinyl that you can hold up to the light and see through. I know I'm going to have this trouble. Now, you have to do this in this order to get this to work. The first thing that you do to play a record when the turntable thinks there's no record is you manually move the tone arm over and get it in position. Alright? Then you use the lifter to drop it. Now, with the tone arm in the down position, hit the start-stop. And the record starts playing. When it gets to the end of the record, because we are in a completely manual mode here, the turntable will not automatically lift the tone arm off of the record. It'll sit in the run-out groove and go around and round. So you have to do it manually by hitting the start-stop button again. If you hit the start-stop button before you lower the tone arm using the lifter button, it will just go back to the other side. So there's a definite order in which you have to do this to get it to play a record that it thinks is transparent. Another feature which is interesting about this particular turntable is the fact that Sony added some extra circuitry inside the turntable that actually mutes the audio unless the stylus is touching the record. If the stylus comes up off of the record, it automatically turns the audio off so you don't hear the motor noise going across here. And there's just a slight delay turning it on when the stylus hits the record to give it time for the stylus to get down in the groove. Now, since they had this extra circuitry, that meant that they had to put some sort of amplifier between the output of the cartridge and the input of your receiver, and they provide the grounding for the cartridge inside the turntable. So the cables that come out of the back of the turntable, the RCA cables, they plug into your phono input, but they do not require grounding because it's already done inside the turntable. Before we close the video, let's talk a little bit about the advantages of the linear tracking system. We've already touched on that. The stylus moves straight across, just like the records were cut, which is a good thing. The other thing that happens here is that there is absolutely no skating force of any kind. On a regular turntable with a regular tone arm, the tone arm, because of the way it's aligned, usually the head of the head shell is cocked a little bit for a better alignment across. It still winds up being 2 to 4 degrees as it goes across here of error. But there is the skating force. The tone arm wants to go on around this way. It wants to keep going because of the geometry of the tone arm. And so you have to have anti-skate, which is basically just a little force that's pushing the tone arm this way to compensate for the fact that it wants to pull itself on around. Anti-skate is not a fixed number. It increases as you get toward the center of the record. So any anti-skate setting is going to be an approximation. The beautiful thing about this tone arm, since it's tangential to the groove, there is no skating force of any kind. As a matter of fact, this type of turntable has one flaw in it, that it can sometimes ride on the little area between the grooves and not down in the grooves, and it'll ride what's between what's called the horns on the record itself, which is little raised things on either side of the top of the groove wall. And if you have a turntable that actually can do that, that means that it's really, really well aligned. So there you go. It is the Sony PSLX55 II, which just might be, it just could possibly be, the perfect turntable. I know that the sound quality without the alignment errors is just amazing. Does it make a difference? The answer is yes. Extremely low distortion, no inner groove distortion at all, unless the record has been damaged by a turntable that's been set up improperly beforehand. If there's groove damage, you're going to hear it. But the inner groove distortion, it's a total non-issue, especially on really high-quality LPs. Thanks for watching the video. Talk to you again soon.